Hi, so it's Robin from EQE here, and I want to talk about mopping up after COVID and some of the things that we can actually expect to face in our work with children. Among the death by social media that we're all suffering from, and which this video has now ironically become a part of, and the bombardment from a plethora of endless webinars now suddenly available on the trio of grief, trauma and bereavement. I want to talk about two industry issues, so not therapeutic per se, but therapeutic industry issues, right? We all need to be aware of these for after lockdown as people who work with children. This is a collection of comments, views, opinions and turns of phrase from more than myself, right? I am being a mouthpiece in this video. Other comments, views, opinions and turns of phrase are available, right? Even if they are wrong. But number one, beware the real monster, which is the rush to capitalize on COVID. And number two, the new race to the bottom which is appearing in terms of mental health and therapeutic work versus putting children first, right? They are not necessarily the same thing. So what's happening? What are we really going to be faced with when children return to school or to normal life? To what extent are we being herded and duped by social media, news and marketing to leap into online training and webinars in order to become instant experts in dealing with grief or trauma, when we finally are able to get back to work with children? Now, in another video, we've described the 6 things that school and children's workers will really be faced with, and they are not grief, trauma and bereavement. So check out that other video on the YouTube channel if you want to know what those 6 issues are. But first, in terms of grief, trauma and bereavement, the messaging out there that we're being bombarded with is that this is going to be some new and massive enemy that we're going to be faced with. There's a bucket load of sudden training promoting a perception that we all need to be experts in grief and trauma and bereavement. Well, no. Fact 1. Schools have been working very effectively on a day-to-day basis with trauma and grief and bereavement for many years now. And they are generally very good at doing so because they're trained to and because they're very experienced in it. In schools, it isn't new. Fact 2. Yes, there will be more children who have, for example, lost loved ones or suffered more trauma than they normally do, or for longer than they normally do. But schools know and love their children. I've said this before, schools will already be very aware of who those children are and be getting geared up to help them in every way that they can. Fact number 3, if we do the maths, it's not a tidal wave. There may indeed be more children than normal who have suffered bereavement and loss in many schools, but it's still really very few in the whole population of most schools, and those children will be looked after and not fall through the net, right? So grief and trauma, that's not going to be something that is going to catch schools out. So beware of capitalizing on COVID. It's important that we stand firm, keep our hands in our pockets, don't panic and don't allow ourselves to be herded in a certain direction by pop science, by the media, by news or marketing. For weeks and weeks now we've been seeing COVID widely being capitalized on in adverts on TV and media. At EQE we've observed a surge in good online therapeutic content as a result of COVID-19, right? Great, but somewhat scarily, in parallel, it's accompanied by a blatant scrabble for what can only be described as a race to capitalize on COVID. And suddenly everyone is throwing online training out there in the areas of grief and trauma and bereavement in order to meet the needs of all the millions of new children who are suddenly going to be coming back to school and life having newly suffered or experienced deep trauma and grief and goodness knows what. And from my perspective as someone who works in outdoor therapeutic practice, wilderness therapy, It's quite jarring to see this being jumped on and propagated in the outdoor practitioner sector, right? Online training in outdoor therapeutic practice with therapeutic groups of children. Let's think about that for a moment. Let me say that again. Online training in outdoor therapeutic practice with therapeutic groups of children, broken children. Don't get me wrong, I'm trying to be balanced in this, but we've got to be real. Some that we've seen is fine, right? Truly educational, truly helpful background to be aware of. But other stuff being touted online is coming across as training and certification in things like grief and trauma and being equipped to work therapeutically with those things outdoors, some as little as a few hours online, as a way to getting outdoors and being able to somehow magically start working therapeutically with broken children. It's quite scary to see. And in some cases, it's blatantly just capitalizing on COVID. So all of this, it's triggered what can only be described as a race to the bottom. A race to the bottom in terms of quality and the level of therapeutic provision and what we come to expect as the level of therapeutic understanding and expertise required to help broken children, and also a race to the bottom in terms of the perceived value of therapeutic training and expertise, right? What does a few hours of online webinars say, for example, about the value of actual clinical therapists and counsellors who have spent years training and in practice to deal with these kinds of issues with real children every day? Or the value of well-trained Senkos in schools? But this is not a 12-hour quick fix to being some kind of grief or trauma diva outdoors. It's not a fast food outlet where we're shopping at here. Yeah, I'll have a Whopper with grief sauce and a side order of trauma, please, and I want it for less than 2 days' effort. Right? How much is that? 350 quid? Yeah, keep the change. Some would lead us to believe there is a tidal wave of new broken children coming, suffering from new trauma, and that it's possible to respond and get equipped to deal with this tidal wave on the basis of a couple of days of online training or a couple of 2-hour webinars, from an expert on trauma or grief. And now we've all got our therapeutic armor on and we're equipped and ready to face the imaginary wave of trauma and grief that we've been told is coming by social media and the COVID capitalists. Look, for the sake of the children we work with, don't get into this race to the bottom. Don't be fooled into taking this path of least resistance and visiting some fast food outlet for whatever your mental health response is to COVID, right? There is no quick fix. It does not exist. A couple of hours or days of online therapeutic background is just that. It's good background information, which is fabulous, right? And I really mean that. Do it. But take a reality check pill in terms of what it is that you've learned and done. Printing off a certificate of attendance after a few hours of online webinars does not then equip you to rush out into the world and proactively work therapeutically with identified children, broken children, especially outdoors. There's a reason why professional practitioners train for this over periods of at least weeks, come on, at least weeks, and studying for months, and then go on to practice for years, whether as a bushcraft instructor or as a therapist or a counsellor or as someone explicitly trained in running outdoor therapeutic interventions, say in a school situation, like a Senko or other well-trained school staff. We need to put children's hearts and minds and emotions first. And yes, get as well informed as we possibly can through reputable online resources. And by the way, we don't do online training or online webinars, so I'm not even talking about myself, right? But be sure to stay away from the E. coli food vans roaming around Planet Webinar selling fast food, quick fix training, capitalizing on COVID. Stop chasing ice cream vans selling melting iced lollies that come in 3 flavors, right? Grief, trauma and bereavement. Iced lollies only cost £1 and they melt very quickly, so stand firm, don't join in a race to the bottom in terms of what working therapeutically with broken children actually involves. We mustn't drive that expertise lower and lower and lower to the lowest possible common denominator, right? What's the least effort and the least cost we can get away with in terms of saying we've done the necessary in terms of mental health, right? Tick the 2-hour trauma webinar box, tick the 2-hour grief webinar box, print off the certificate. We're all now frontline troops. Right, that is not in the best interests of broken children. And this battle isn't even going to be about trauma and grief and bereavement. It's not even going to be about that. We've elaborated on what the 6 real issues facing schools and children's workers will be post-COVID in another video. So go check it out if you want to know what we should all be focusing on. Look, true expertise and professionalism costs in time and effort and practice. There's no shortcut when it comes to broken children's hearts, minds, lives and emotions. Don't become part of the race to the bottom in that area of expertise.